All right, well, let's start there then. I mean, are you actually present with the family? Do you have the mythical work-life balance correct then? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I would say so. I would say so. I work quite long hours, but I drop my daughter off at nursery every morning, um, and I'm back home for bedtime each night to be able to bath the kids and have dinner with the wife and sit down for a couple of hours and watch Netflix. So yeah, I would say I've got that balance. On a weekend, yeah, of course, I dip into work. I'm checking my emails. I'll maybe spend a couple of hours on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, doing some work. But yeah, I think as a business, part of our culture is really embracing work-life balance and making sure that everybody has that. We have our team wellbeing meetings on a Friday, and as
Mm-hmm.
part of that, if anybody comes out and says, "Well, last night I was up until 2 o'clock in the morning, working on my CPD or preparing some learning resources for delivery," they get told off. And we make it very clear to them that, look, you really need to be having that downtime. You need to be spending your time with your family, and that's something that we push. And as leaders, we have to be leading by example with that as well. I think you can't preach about work-life balance if you're not setting those standards yourself. And I think that's probably something I learned quite recently too.
I mean, in terms of, just going back to your career and, 7 years you were at a previous business, you've gone through a couple others to get to where you are now. Has there been any particular interesting experiences along the way where you've gone, wow, that's something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life, good or bad?
I've experienced redundancy twice. I think that'll be an experience that I'll remember for the rest of my life. When you are made redundant from a position, it does feel very, very daunting. And when you've got mortgage payments to consider, you don't know where the next paycheck's going to come from. I think I've always had the self-belief to know that I'd be able to go find something that's going to be suitable. And I've always tried to look at things like redundancy as maybe a sign, maybe an opportunity to go find something that's better suited, maybe an opportunity to take a step up. And I think actually one of the reasons that I've progressed quite quickly in my career was because of redundancy. I think it actually helped my career. And when I was with that large training provider where I spent 4.5 years, I progressed really well in that business. Started as a recruitment executive and ended as a head of sales, but I was really only in that head of sales role for 3 months before being made redundant. And within a week of being made redundant, I'd been offered 2 positions as sales director, one at a local college and one with another private training provider. So it was a great opportunity for me to move up very quickly. But looking back at it, I almost wonder whether it was the step up was almost too quick because of my lack of experience in a head of sales capacity, then going up straight up to a sales director so soon after. But I'm one of these people that learns best when thrown in at the deep end, and I think there's no better opportunity to learn something than just doing it and making mistakes along the way and learning things.
So embracing the mistakes rather than dwelling on them ultimately.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's something that particularly young people struggle with, is they will dwell on those mistakes and overthink them and almost get stuck in their career because of what happened once upon a time somewhere else for them. Have you had to turn away business from a client or a company that you've just gone, you're just not the right fit for the apprenticeship model?
Yeah, we have some organizations where we don't, it can be really very difficult to get in touch with them, and they're just so busy that we just get the feel that they are not going to have the time to invest in an apprentice from a support and nurture and guidance perspective. Yeah, we've rejected those type of organizations. There's also been companies where there's maybe been 1 or 2 people in the company, or maybe they lack the technical expertise to be able to give the necessary guidance. So yeah, those kind of organizations we wouldn't work with. But we would always have conversations with them, and we would signpost them to a different scheme perhaps. There was one recently, there was a one-man band who wanted to bring an apprentice on, but he didn't have any office space. He didn't have employer's liability insurance at the time. He said he could get that. But ultimately, from having a 20-minute conversation with him, it turned out that actually an apprenticeship wouldn't really be the right fit for his organisation. So I spoke to him about the Kickstart scheme and gave him the necessary advice and guidance around there, where you might not have the same hoops to jump through in order to be eligible for that. And we would never just close the door on somebody. We would also always give them the right advice and guidance. And we'd say to them, look, once you've got your own officers and you've got 3 or more people and you've got the technical competency in-house, come back to us, let's have a conversation again.
So I'm just leading off that then. Official or unofficial mentors, family members, friends, has there been anyone in particular that you could say over the period of your career, they've really influenced, what I've done and where I've gone? I mean, you talked about your dad being in the position he was in Rolls-Royce, and that kind of led you down that path at university. But anyone else you really looked up to, I suppose, growing up?
So in terms of inspirational people in my life, my mum and dad were certainly 2 of those people. They probably stretched their own budget to move from a less affluent part of the city to a nicer suburb, which allowed myself and my sister to have access to better schools and ultimately get a better level of education. So I'll always be thankful and very grateful for what they did there. They've always made sure that my values and my morals are in line. So I think certainly for me, they've been a really big impact. From a business perspective, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region. When I worked for IMS Lettings and then later on at Safe and Secure Insurance, I worked under the managing director, who's a guy called Chris Griffin. He often spoke to me about the fact that he felt as though I had more potential than I was showing. And he spent time in sort of coaching me and training me. And he used to get me to read books. I always remember one called Who Moved My Cheese? That was, and he would ask me to kind of come back and talk to him about, my feelings about that particular book and what I've taken out of that. After I'd worked at Safe and Secure, I went on to an organisation called 3As, and I worked quite closely with the chief exec of that business as well, and a lot of the other directors. And it was a guy called Pete Marples. He was a fantastic entrepreneur, had great vision for business growth, and and then he came from an apprenticeship background himself. And ultimately, it was him and other directors, sales director Paul Brunskill, that opened up a whole world of opportunities for me. And part of my progression from going from a sales executive or recruitment executive as an entry-level post, I progressed all the way to head of sales in that organization. And the opportunities that they gave me along the way were fantastic. We've spoken about the opportunity that I got to go over to America and do a bit of an assessment on the American apprenticeship business that we'd set up over there. Phenomenal experience that I just wouldn't have had if I'd have not had that relationship. Moving on from there, worked with a fantastic guy over at Baltic Training called Tony Hobbs, and he was the managing director of that organization. Other great directors there that I learned a lot from as well, but Tony particularly stands out, and a lot of what he taught me there is what I've brought over into this role at EMA. Baltic were a very good business for staff culture, for retention and staff engagement, and I think that's certainly something that's really high on my agenda to make sure that we get right here. And finally, one of the most impressive people that I've had the privilege to work with, Tracy, and Tracy's our chief exec here. The way that she puts the needs of her team ahead of her own, and she will get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to deal with her own emails, and she'll work until later at night to deal with her own tasks. Her daytime on a Monday to Friday is all about supporting the team around her and creating that environment of just supporting everybody, getting involved in everything from curriculum design to development to the operations to sales to account management. She gets involved in all elements of the business, supporting our apprentices. She's got a hell of a lot of people that line into her that require her help and guidance and support, and she gives that. And she's been a great role model for me, and somebody that I've learned a lot from.
I think one thing that's clear there is that the various people that you've worked under, that you've looked up to, have all seen the same quality in you, which is you've got a tremendous amount in you in terms of your progression, your career, and ultimately, who you are as a person in those roles. And they've all given you a significant amount of trust, and clearly it's been paying off.
I think so, and I don't. My self-esteem hasn't always been particularly high. When I dropped out of university, I think that probably did have a bit of an effect on my own personal self-esteem, and being made redundant a couple of times, that can have an effect on your self-esteem and your value as well. But it certainly helps when you're being told that you've got potential there, and when you're given these opportunities. And I found it quite humbling. And I think it kind of comes back to the point that we made about when I was offered the role as a COO, when I rejected the job title. I said I didn't want that job title. And again, I think that comes down to maybe a slight lack of self-esteem in that respect, and maybe imposter syndrome kicking in there as well, and saying, I don't currently have the level of experience in that, and maybe I don't have the self-belief. But I think sometimes you need to take a step back and you say, right, maybe I'm just being overcritical of myself. And maybe you need to listen to others more who are able to give more of a critical opinion of you as a character and your potential as a business person. And actually, like I say, I was incredibly humbled to be offered those positions. And that has to give you confidence that other people see something in you.
It does. And I think a lot of the time you're right with the imposter syndrome, especially if you don't feel yourself that you have the skill set yet. However, the entrepreneur or the CEO or the person that is leading the company typically has that vision. And certainly one of the key points that a chief exec needs to hold is the ability to hire, retain, and train great people. And if they see something for you, or they see you are capable of something, there's probably a good reason for them, to see that in you.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think sometimes I do have to take a step back and look at what we've achieved over what's been a very difficult year with the pandemic. And actually, if I'm ever doubting myself, I do take that step back and we say, right, well, this is what we've achieved. This is, we've increased our numbers from 65 learners to 115, and we've increased our staff count. We've been able to bring on some of the best people in the region, and actually you have to take that step back and say, do you know what, you're doing a good job, and maybe you just have to give yourself a bit more credit.
Sometimes you just have to give yourself a pat on the back.
That's it. Too right.
All right.